Well, the most exciting part about all of this is actually the MIT experience and why we're even talking about this today. A little bit of my personal story is I went to grad school at MIT, and I was there at a really magical time. It happened to be during the dot-com or Web 1.0 period of time, 1977 to 1999. And there were a lot of ideas that were being generated there, that ultimately made it out to market. Fantastic successes and so forth that really shaped the internet and so forth. So being there was really cool, but what was even more cool was working in the Entrepreneurship Center and doing things like starting the first MIT Venture Capital Conference, which we're about to have the 14th one of those. We also started a thing called the MIT Global Startup Workshop, where we invited other universities from throughout the globe to come to MIT to talk about how do we take ideas out of laboratories and take them to market. And out of that, we started developing relationships with a lot of universities throughout the world, including National University of Singapore, Cambridge University, and here, of course. So for me, coming to this event and having a chance to address you is a real privilege because it's given me a chance to see something that I planted a seed in, over 13, 14 years ago, and seeing what it's really kind of grown into. So thank you for inviting me back to this. Last night I went to dinner with a lot of the people here on the front row to try to figure out what you guys wanted to talk about or wanted to hear about. And before I came out here, we were talking about renewable energy, clean technology, which is where my passion is, where I've spent the last dozen years of my life. But I had this canned presentation about the history of clean technology in the United States and where the markets are going and the technology versus the invested capital on projects, which I think Ellie did a very good job of describing. And then they said, nah, that'd be kind of boring. I actually didn't say that. They're really nice to me about this. They said we really want to talk to the audience about what they want to talk about, which is entrepreneurship, the energy around that, and how to be successful, and how to take some of these ideas out in the world. How about an inspirational speech? I don't know. I don't know if I do inspiration very well, but I'll try it. So I changed up the presentation a little bit today, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit about something that might be of interest to you guys. First of all, how many of you, not by raising hands, not by nodding heads, I want real participation here. I want to hear a yeah when I ask this question, if you agree with this. How many of you, and I want a loud one, how many of you are entrepreneurs? I'm sorry, I must be too far away from you. I'm going to ask this question again. How many of you are entrepreneurs? Okay, in addition to being entrepreneurs, how many of you are sitting on the sidelines, here to learn about it, and want to be entrepreneurs? All right, and how many of you actually are saying, what is entrepreneur? All right, so it sounds like, I'm going to ask the question one more time. How many of you have heard of the word entrepreneur, want to be an entrepreneur, or are entrepreneurs? Yeah. Come on. All right. So anyhow, this is the presentation for you guys. So to give a little bit of a background, I've had a wonderful journey from MIT out into the world, and hopefully I'll talk about some of those experiences. But I'll tell the story about where entrepreneurial passion comes from, and what are some of the steps you might want to think about in harnessing that to be able to go build companies. So first, I'm going to throw out this idea of you need to understand who you are. You need to understand what your nature is. What's inside of you, what's been there since birth that you have sat on, you felt strongly about, you don't know what to do with, but it really means something to you. It's really what's at the core of you. And what are you doing to make sure that you understand what that is, and how do you take that out in the world? And then ultimately, you may not know what that is, but you keep on coming back to it time and time again, year after year, and you finally say, I want to go do this. This is what I'm all about. Well, that's your nature. So follow that nature, try to hone into that nature, try to figure out what that is, what you're really kind of passionate about, and build experiences around that, build skills around it. Go to business school, go to technology school, go practice it. From my experience, my nature was always energy in the environment. I grew up in West Texas in the oil patch, and I studied renewable energy as a grade school at a university, and it was always with me. And I deviated. I went and did chemical engineering for my undergraduate degree. I worked in the chemical industry. But I came back to it. I worked on energy environmental policy in my last few years working on my undergraduate education. I worked as a management consultant in the energy industry. It wasn't renewable at the time, but advising major utilities and major petrochemical companies on where they needed to go in the future. And then I fell in love with the technology around the energy industry, and I became a leading industry analyst on the East Coast of the United States, covering technologies that were helping manage those energy operations. So I couldn't say that I was really following my nature, but I started building a whole bunch of experiences around that allowed me to build more expertise and more more depth in this area that I was really passionate about. The next thing you have to figure out is how do you let that loose? And so understanding your nature and letting that loose really comes down to following your passion. After you've gained that experience, look for that moment of inspiration where you say, you know what, I'm ready to go do something about this. I feel really strongly about this one thing, and you set it free. In my case, it happened to be in 2001. I'd already graduated from MIT. I'd already been out in Silicon Valley as a venture capitalist, and I'd already made one of my first investments into an energy technology company. And I was getting excited about this, and I started advising a group called the Environmental Capital Network. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And then I went to an alternative energy investing conference in New York City. Well, that conference happened to be on the morning of September 11th. And I woke up, that woke me up, woke something really strongly up inside of me. When there was not a policy response from our government in the United States to say, let's go fix this underlying energy situation that caused our monetary flows to go into the hands of terrorists to attack us, I said, if there's not going to be a policy response, we need to have a private capital response. So that was what awakened in me at that time. And that opened up a whole new set of questions, a whole new set of opportunities. And I started banding together with a whole bunch of other venture capitalists at the time saying, why don't we go do something about this? I'll also say that at the time, there wasn't clean technology. It hadn't been branded that way. It was what I call boring tech. Industrial technologies, energy technologies, environmental technologies. Nobody had made it a sexy investing category for venture capitalists. So what we did is we put together an organization in Silicon Valley. It was founded by the former CEO of Serface Corporation and a couple of other people, where we put a whole bunch of entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and CEOs together to say, what can we do to be able to go solve this problem? And we formed an organization called Environmental Entrepreneurs, which really was kind of the first organization that was really advocating for environmental policy in the United States from a business standpoint. And one of the first things we did was actually put some seed funding into rebranding boring tech into clean tech. And we invested into an organization called the Clean Tech Venture Network. All of a sudden, what was boring and stupid and old became cool, sexy. The next thing we did was we actually went to talk to the pension funds of the state of California, CalPERS and CalSTRS. They're the guys that put money into venture capital firms and said, why don't you put some more money into this space? And once they started putting money into the space, the entire space started taking off. Another thing we did is we worked on policy. So we actually passed the first piece of carbon legislation in North America in California that did a lot in terms of where California is going, but more importantly, 12 other states copied this legislation, took it to the Supreme Court, and at the end of the Bush administration, the Supreme Court ruled that yes, the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States has to regulate carbon emissions. Well, that gives the current administration a chance to actually say, we have a carbon policy in this country, even though they haven't implemented it yet. So the work I did over 10 years ago has come forward and actually is going to make a difference as we go forward further investing further down the road. So follow your passion and follow all dimensions of it. So I kind of got ahead of myself. Lead a movement. If you're really passionate about it, go be a thought leader where your passion lies. Sell it, build it, make an event around it, or build a brand around it. In addition to that, in a lot of places we go to throughout the world, Lisbon and other countries, cities that I've traveled to throughout the United States, they want to be entrepreneurial. They want to build clusters of innovation. So in those cases, you not only have to be a technology entrepreneur, you also have to be a community entrepreneur. In most of these places, you don't already have the supporting ecosystem to go build it. Here, with the university and with the programs you've created, the fact that we're even here today points to you're building that. You're doing a fantastic job. But in your community, you need to identify the specific resources here that are unique and that you can build on. And you need to build winning coalitions, and you need to use your city or your community as a living laboratory. What I did in my past was I left Silicon Valley to go to Austin, Texas, to run an incubator there. And we worked really closely with the utility, with the city, and the university. And we said, what can we do with this unique set of actors to be able to do something different here than anybody else has done? Well, Austin Energy happened to be an aggressive adopter of renewable energy efficiency. So what we said is what's missing here is we don't have the demand to be able to pull new startup technology companies to Austin to be able to go prove themselves on the grid. The hardest thing for a technology or energy startup to do is get that first customer. So we worked with the city council to provide funding and with the utility itself to provide a way to incubate technologies and prove them out on the Austin Energy grid without having to do anything else. And that evolved, that grew, that started attracting a lot of companies to be in Austin. But ultimately, it created a project called the Pecan Street Project, where we've now taken all those efforts and taken an entire greenbelt community, and we started putting moats in 100 different nodes inside of homes, put solar panels in every single one of them, electric vehicles in every single one of them, advanced transformers in every single one of those communities, and have 15-second resolution data on everything, every light switch that's turned on and off. We then take that data, run it through a supercomputer at the University of Texas to understand what the predictive algorithms might be about how the load is going to be changing throughout that entire dynamic system. And you can now predict, based on a light switch, what you need to do throughout the rest of the network. So from that's created a whole destination center to be able to bring advanced smart grid technologies where that didn't even exist 5 years ago. So you can do that in your community, but find those strengths in your community, pull those coalitions together to attract the demand and create technologies that fit those community needs. Also, don't be afraid of being a policy entrepreneur. Yeah, it's distracting from your mission as an entrepreneur itself and building companies, but it makes a difference. If you can step out ahead of the curve, work on policy, whether it's your local policy in your city, your state, your country, your European Union, fantastic, go do that. But set the standard of where you need to be, because when you have new policies that work together with new technologies, you actually get progress. Finally, it's not always the technology. So Ellie gave a great presentation a moment ago. He gave one slide in that presentation where we talked about technologies. Well, technology didn't matter in this situation. There are a lot of cases where technologies are mature enough to be able to make it on their own. The question is, how do you finance those or build new business models to allow those technologies to work in the existing infrastructure that you're implementing them? So you also have to remember that technologies themselves do not sell themselves. They often require a lot of other complementary assets. Last night over dinner, we had a really interesting conversation about one of the companies I helped spin out of MIT, which was called Akamai Technologies. It is now kind of the underpinning for distributed content on the internet, but nobody talks about it anymore because it's not that cool. But in the day when it came out of MIT, it really was cool because at the time we were bandwidth constrained getting content out to individual users on the internet. So a researcher came up with this idea of having an algorithm that would distribute content where it needed to be so it was ready to be used by the users of the internet. And that was fantastic, but you can't go sell an algorithm. An algorithm itself is not, it may be technology, but it's nothing. You can't go sell that to anybody. So another friend of ours worked on this for a couple months. He came from the telecom industry, brilliant guy, and he said, what we need to do is we need to go take advantage of low-cost servers, free BSD servers, and we need to put servers all over the world at the edge of the network. And if it wasn't having the unique situation of an algorithm, inexpensive new free BSD servers, and an idea about a business model about how to be able to distribute that content, the company would have never taken off. So it's not just the technology, it's the team, it's the complementary technologies you bring into it, and the way you go put it into the existing infrastructure. Also, I want to point out, you don't always have to go for the disruptive and new best idea in the world. Sometimes incremental technologies win. Sometimes you can find something that you're at the tipping point of an incremental innovation that pushes something over the edge, that allows it to have greater market access or economic value in the market. But what's more important than that is it all comes down to execution. So regardless of model you're talking about here, you have to be willing to execute all the way through to success. So, to wrap this up, it's execution, but you also must be maniacally committed to success. So everybody understand this, maniacally committed? You have to be insanely committed to success. And you also have to surround yourself with the best team possible. I think Ellie gave a great example in his case where they brought on somebody who had a tremendous amount of experience knowing the project finance world. That was a critical step forward for the company. Well, you also need to make sure whenever you bring somebody like that on board, they are as maniacally committed to success as you are. You also need to pick the right capital partner. Venture capital alone may not be the right partner for you. It depends on what type of business you're going to be trying to launch. You may need a bank, you may need an angel, you may need a project finance firm. But make sure that you pick the partner and it matches with your values, that they are maniacally committed to your success, and that you can work with them for a long period of time. And the final point here is be adaptable and be visionary. These seem like two contradictory statements. Yes, you need it, and this comes from our dinner conversation last night. The most successful companies out there seem to be the most visionary ones. But you also have to be adaptable. You have to recognize the changes in the market that you're going after. You have to understand that you're going to receive a lot of competition. Somebody's going to come up with a better technology or better business model, whatever else. You have to be able to go execute against that, and you have to be able to be adaptable to do so. So those are, some simple points I've taken from my experience over the last dozen years as an entrepreneur and as an investor. I'm not sure if we have any time for questions, but I'd be happy to field some if we do. No, I'm getting the head shake. All right, well, catch me afterwards if you guys want to ask any questions. Happy to tell you more and more stories about this. But thank you for being here, and thanks for taking this idea of global startups and global innovators network forward. So thank you.